If you remember from last week, the focus was on Joseph and how his faith and perseverance could help guide us as we traveled through Advent on our own journey. This week, Susan Smith will speak to us on his spouse, the Blessed Virgin Mary. Susan was born the third of 6 children to a pair of Cajun Catholics. Susan grew up in the faith and first started lay service as a teenager in her home state of Louisiana at St. Jean Vianney Parish. While living in Baton Rouge, Susan married Scott, a Protestant Yankee, gave birth to her first son, Luke, and became involved at St. Jude the Apostle Parish. After completing her degree at LSU, she joined Scott and Luke in Houston, where son number 2, Devin, was born. Over the years, Susan dedicated time not only to ministry at St. Bernadette, but also to the community in various PTA and Boy Scout positions. Several years ago, she became a certified spiritual director and now serves at St. Bede's with RCIA, the Spiritual Life Committee, and the Grief Support Group. Let us please welcome Susan Smith.
Thank you, Maxine. I had to unmute myself. Now, we had a technical difficulty earlier. I will tell you, I've got a little bit of frog in my throat, so there may be a little more technical difficulties as I give this talk, but I'll try to keep it to a limit. So if Matthew, if you could start my slideshow. Thank you. So I titled this Mary's Perspective, and I'll begin to talk with a confession, is that I have not seen these sculptures in person. I've only seen the videos and the photographs. So if you go to the next slide. So even without knowing the story, just looking at the photo, the sculpture can be admired as it is. I find the work intriguing when I looked at all 3 of the figures, the man, the woman, and the boy, at their positioning. I admired all the crevices and creases in the bronzes, the way the shadows hit, the light, how their faces are, their positioning. I mean, artwork can be admired just for the technical aspects of it. And Kate Marin's explanation of how she created pieces is very interesting, because the story is what breathes life into artwork. But not being able to see it in person, I wanted to have more of a connection. So I did this by breaking open the story that we're using that served as the centerpiece for the artwork. And I looked into Mary, particularly as the mother of a 12-year-old son. So I read and reread the story from Luke that we're focusing on in chapter 2. And the Gospel of Matthew and Luke mention 3 times that Mary took trips, including this one. Now, the first trip she took was after the Enunciation, when she visited her cousin Elizabeth. The second occurred after Jesus' birth, and depending on which gospel you read, either she went right back home to Nazareth after Jesus' birth in Bethlehem, or after Joseph took them into Egypt to avoid Herod, and that was in Matthew's gospel. And then, of course, they have this time when she and Joseph and Jesus traveled to Jerusalem, and her son decided to exercise his free will and intellect by staying behind in Jerusalem when he should have been joining his family in the caravan. And so I began to wonder what was going on in her mind in this trip. Because as a mother, a woman, and a wife, I was a wife for many years. I wanted to present Mary's perspective onto this journey and show the strength, the courage, and the trust that would have carried her through this tough time. And we know that Mary pondered things in her heart. So I can imagine as she and Joseph are walking the streets of Jerusalem, she's pondering things. She's not just attending to the business at hand of finding Jesus. I had a personal experience of sitting in the waiting room once, and while waiting for word of the medical condition of the person I was with, all these memories came flooding into my head, all these flashbacks as to the good times that we had in different places. And that still keeps happening to me. So I can imagine what's going on with Mary. She's walking the streets and she's worried about Jesus, but she's also having these wonderful little memories coming back into her mind. If we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. This is part of our story from Luke chapter 2, verses 41 through 45. Each year, his parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to festival custom. After they had completed its days, as they were returning, the boy Jesus remained behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Thinking that he was in the caravan, they journeyed for a day and looked for him among their relatives and acquaintances. But not finding him, they returned to Jerusalem to look for him. Now, I did a little bit of research, and I think what I found out was that their trip to Jerusalem would have been very happy, would have been very joyful. You would have had people in little groups walking, like the adults talking, gossiping, catching up on things. There would have been some singing. The kids would have been running around, kind of running in between people, playing games. It would have been just a real happy, joyful time. Now, unless you've actually lost a child or had one unexpectedly leave, it's hard to imagine that sense of loss. And I have a little bit of a clue. I've never left a child behind, so I've never lost a child. But I did have one of my sons escape the house. It was a nice day and I had the windows open, and he pushed the screen and he went over the ledge and he went into the yard. And like Mary and Joseph, I had no clue that he had even left. So you can imagine what I felt like when he finally showed up on my doorstep. The shock. I mean, it was like, why? Well, how could he have done that? So we know that Mary was no stranger to Jerusalem. She would have been there many times because in Deuteronomy in chapter 16, it says, 3 times a year, every male among you shall appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, at the Feast of the Bread, at the Feast of Weeks, and at the Feast of Booths. And as Joseph's wife, she would have made many trips up there, and she probably did with her parents as well. So I'm hoping she had enough of a sense of the city that when Jesus got lost, left behind, she would have known to maybe have some familiarity with the city. Next slide, please. So when they go into the city to search for Jesus, I think Mary probably remembered the first time that she and Joseph brought Jesus to the temple 8 days after his birth to present him according to the custom. Now, I can remember when I first brought my son to church after he was born. My oldest was just, I think, about 6 weeks old when Christmas time came. I think that was the first time I brought him. I remember being very satisfied. I remember the pride and the joy I felt. So I can imagine both Mary and Joseph feeling the same. So when I look at the statue, I see how quietly Mary watches. She's waiting in silence to catch Jesus' eyes. And maybe at that time, she's remembering the words of Simeon, when he proclaimed her son, a light for the revelation to the Gentiles and glory for your people, Israel. She and Joseph must have been really happy when Simeon blessed the boy. Now, walking the streets, searching for Jesus, I wonder if she's remembering the words of Simeon, that this child is destined to be a sign and will be contradicted, and you yourself a sword will pierce, so that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. And I think now that she's roaming the city and she's searching for her son, I know her heart is pierced in many places. Perhaps Mary consoled herself by pondering the words of Anna. And coming forward at that time, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were listening, awaiting the redemption of Jerusalem. I think Mary would have felt very redeemed just to find Jesus safe and sound as quickly as possible. Next slide. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astonished at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been looking for you with great anxiety." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Now, if I had found Jesus in any place but the temple, I would not have been like, "Oh, why have you done this to us?" It would have been more like, "Boy, why did you do this?" But we'll leave it at that. So the enormity of the search for Jesus must have been overwhelming to Joseph and Mary, compounding the anxiety they felt when time after time he couldn't be found. I think it surprises a lot of people that Mary and Joseph were anxious, because we think of that as being a very negative emotion. Unlike us, though, in the midst of their anxiety, their focus was Jesus. Most of the time, our focus when we're anxious is not Jesus. We're caught up in our problems and whatever it is that's concerning us, and to that such an extent that we often block out God. And I think that's the reason Jesus says not to be anxious, not to let your worries overtake you. Now, I like to read, and every now and then I'll go and I'll look up a word. And it's not because I don't know what the word is, it's because I want to find what the root word is. So the root word for worry, anxiety, and anger is all the same, and it means to strangle. So many of us, when we feel anxious, we experience that tightening in the throat. It makes it difficult to speak, and sometimes it makes it hard to breathe. So I asked a parishioner one time, I don't know if y'all remember Ed Becknell, but he used to be an actor. So, and I was lecturing at the time. So I was like, "Ed, what do I do when my throat tightens up and I can't talk?" He goes, "Breathe, do some stretches, open your jaw, but just breathe." So, yeah. But I think even in the anxiousness that Mary felt, she did not cut off that ruah, that breath of God, because when I looked at that sculpture, I see her clothes flowing. So that tells me that that breath of God is always with her. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is a painting of the flight into Egypt. So one of the times that Mary and Joseph had to go back home was after they went into Egypt because they were trying to escape Herod's men. And there's a lot of little legends about the time that they spent in Egypt. Because we don't know, there's a whole lot of questions about how long they were in Egypt, where they traveled. And I really didn't want to get into all that. But this is how I think they felt. She's got her baby back in her arms, because no matter how old your son is, he's still your baby. At least mine are. And once again, the family's together. Now, I think after Passover, most people, excuse me, would have left Jerusalem by now. They may have been lucky to catch up with a caravan going back home. If not, it would have been a dangerous journey. Just the three of them, perhaps as dangerous as his flight into Egypt. Next slide, please. He went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them, and his mother kept all these things in her heart. And Jesus advanced in wisdom and age and favor before God and man. Next slide. We don't know what the Holy Family talked about on the way home, if they spoke at all. Maybe they waited till they got home. But I can imagine Mary pondering what we refer to as the Enunciation. Like other moms, sometimes when our children cause us grief and worry, we may wonder, why on earth did I have this child? because we're in parenthood not really knowing and understanding what to expect. And then after we say that, we think about it, and we remember that love and that trust that we have in God and in our spouse, and how God has led us so far, and that we just need to keep trusting and just keep persevering. Next slide, please. Yes, this picture is depicting the Holy Family as they made their way into Egypt. But to me, it symbolized that relief they felt when they got home, after the commotion and the anxiety of the previous days, that they could finally relax. I once had a friend tell me that your children need you more when you're older than when they're babies. And that's true, but they need you in a different way. They need you to learn to trust them more. And then you both grow a little stronger in your relationship, get more confident in their abilities, because it takes a lot of courage to raise them, especially with that age from like where Jesus is, that 12, kind of 13-year-old to when they get to be about 18, 25, 30. Next slide, please. So this is final slide. And I picture Mary now at home looking at Jesus, and she sees how strong and how tall and how graceful he's become. And remembering that part of scripture, he advanced in wisdom and age and favor before God and man. This does mark that turning point in her relationship with him as he's growing into manhood. Because he grows into manhood, he's going to spend, if he's not already now, less time with her and more time with Joseph. Because Joseph and his other male relatives, they're going to teach him how to become a man. And it's not that he's going to forget his mom, but things are going to be changing now. And there's a little bit of a bittersweet moment, because you realize that they're getting big, they're not your baby anymore, and they start to pull away, and you start to have a little bit of apprehension as to what they will encounter. But Mary will always have Joseph, at least for a few years, and they'll be able to lean on each other and encourage each other and go on to with life. So I do have some questions for y'all now. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the questions were, what do you do when you feel lost, anxious, or afraid? Where do you turn? And how would you describe your relationship to Mary? A spiritual mother, a sister, a friend, a neighbor? And how willing are you to trust where God will lead you? And I thank y'all for listening.
Thank you, Susan, for your insights into Mary. So now you're going to have about 3 minutes for reflection on these questions that are posted here. Or if you need to take a bathroom break or get a drink, now is a great time to do this. And then you're going to be moved into a breakout room for a small group discussion about the questions. And that's going to be about 18 minutes that you'll be in small group. And then you'll be called back together to share and so if there is anyone who would like to share something from their small group discussion, we have some time to be able to do that.
I'll start. So I had the group with Valerie and Sheba, and so we mentioned, when we feel lost and anxious and afraid, we usually go to prayer, and sometimes that may be journaling, it could be out in nature, it takes different forms, but that's usually our first way of getting closer and figuring out the answers. And then with our relationship with Mary, several of the ladies mentioned, they view Mary as more of a mother figure to them and support. So, and then for trust, we mentioned for some of us, it was one that it can be hard, to give complete trust to God, but he has, he knows the big picture, and we may not, but we just have to trust and be humble to accept what he has planned. So those are a few things that we talked about.
I'm just going to mention about the third one, about how willing are you to trust where God will lead you. I think everybody in our group was like, well, we had 3 men that are all retired and me retired and then back to work a little bit, and another man that kind of back to work. But we are in that stage of our lives that we trust. I guess the wisdom that comes with years of life, I guess. But the other thing I shared with them that I heard today, someone told me, there's this lady that has had cancer for 15 years and she's like in hospice and she's still trying to do stuff for serving God. And the one thing this lady says is when she wakes up every morning, it's like, not only does she trust God, but it's like, Lord, how can I glorify you today? And so with that being said, it's like really leaving it at God's disposal, her life. And it's, but Lord, how can I glorify you today? And it's like, man, that's deep. And I'm going to start trying to do that. Full trust in the Lord.
Grant, are you trying to talk? Are you talking, Grant? You need to unmute.
Once again, I failed to unmute myself. God is trying to tell me something, I think. But our group, Ron, Dave, and myself, we really enjoyed the small group. Whereas last week we had 6 people. With 3, we didn't feel like we were rushed. But anyway, for being lost, anxious, or afraid, I think prayer was the main thing, and also trusted people. So you share with others, and then mostly with God to overcome that. For our relationship to Mary, you know, although I would say that not as much as we should really. We were kind of saying we didn't really have. It's more of an ideal, like our spiritual mother. But for someone as myself who struggles with anxiety, Mary, as the example, as Susan rightly pointed out, is the example of a woman who had to deal with anxiety and solve that with trust in God. That is the epitome of the example of trust in God. We should really go to her for that. And then for the third question, how willing to trust where God will lead you. The general answer was, if we know God is directing us a certain way, we do surrender and try to do that. But I really like what Tammy was saying about the woman in hospice. That's a great way to be.
I have just one quick one because everybody's covered things, and that something was said in our group that was very interesting, I thought, and that was about the third one. I mean, most people in our groups kind of felt we were willing to trust where God was leading us. The hard part is figuring out when and how and where, and noticing when he is trying to lead you. It's not just you thinking that he's trying to lead you in a certain way. And that sometimes is the difficult part.
Well, I just have to say, I think Ellie was able to figure out when God was trying to lead you, because she said it was like being hit on the head by a 2x4. Okay, well, thank you everybody for sharing. And so once again, we're going to end with a short guided meditation and prayer. So we're going to take a moment, find a comfortable position where you're sitting. Close your eyes. Try to quiet your mind. Relax. Focus on your breathing. And let us reflect on Mary as our companion on our own personal Advent journey. And what are you bringing with you on this journey? Hopes, gratitude, fear, a specific need? Luke 1:38. Then Mary said, "Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord. May it but be done to me according to your word." Yes. What power there is in Mary's yes. Mary had the courage to make her yes complete and total, to become the mother of Jesus. Mary trusted and was given the grace and the strength to continue on this lifelong journey as his first disciple. Where do you hear God asking you to say yes this Advent season? Do you have the courage to say yes? Take comfort in Mary's trust in God, from which flowed the graces needed to fulfill her yes. What graces do you need as you move forward on your own Advent journey? Ask Mary for her intercession now and look to her example of trust, courage, and strength. And go ahead and open your eyes now, and let's pray this short prayer together. O Holy Mary, the grace given to you to say yes to God with your whole being is the same grace available to me. Help me to say my yes as fully as you did. Amen. And now we're going to end the second week of our Advent retreat with a final song called Waiting in Silence.